Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Entertainment Series, the Unported playlist, where I take a list of my favorite unported arcade games of all time. And if you can't tell already, we're in the month of October, so we've got some light gun horror fun for you with Dragon Gun, released in 1992 by Data East. I actually talked about this game about 3 years ago, but now that I have a much larger audience and it is October, I figured it was time for a revisit because I absolutely love every single thing this game does. It is wild, over-the-top fantasy horror light gun goodness, and it is my favorite genre as far as arcade games are concerned. Before we get too far involved though, do me a huge favor down below, hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. If you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, I got a Patreon link down below as well. But Dragon Gun just does absolutely everything right in my opinion. It's got some amazing 2D sprites, it's got great scaling, it's got a fun fantasy horror vibe going on with tons of different monsters and zombies to shoot at, and it is just one of those games that I feel like most people watching have never heard of before. I would say the closest game in comparison I could make would be Alien 3: The Gun from Sega, but obviously that had a big movie franchise attached to it and Sega made it, so that has continued to be one of the best and most loved arcade light gun games of all time from Sega, where something like Dragon Gun basically got forgotten about. Now, unfortunately, this game did not succeed on arcade floors, so you're not really going to see very many arcade cabinets for it anymore. It actually got a conversion board for that particular cab locked and loaded, where they could basically just pivot the game over to being a classic bad guy versus cop shoot 'em up game, which isn't bad whatsoever. That's also a fun game, but honestly, Dragon Gun just is 100% more the vibe I want. This gigantic spread of the skeleton there is amazing, and coming through this room with all of these purples and blues and the chandeliers hanging while you just shoot the limbs off of zombies is spectacular, and being able to blow their torso off and watching their leg just basically run out of the screen trying to save themselves is just such an amazing aesthetic. And again, you know I love horror games, talking about them on the channel in October, so hopefully this is one you're going to be able to play with friends this Halloween and give it a good shot and have a ton of fun. This basically feels like something like Conan the Barbarian come to life as a light gun game with all of these different monsters without any of the actual human opponents, and being dragged up into the air by this giant dragon into the sky while you actually just unload your clip onto his head is just a ton of fun. Now, there is a decent amount of depth and strategy to this game as well. You're going to get different power-ups throughout the game, and you're going to have 3 bombs as well. You want to preserve those just to get out of tight spots, and you want to try to find every single power-up in a level, because if you get that entire gauge powered up completely, you're basically going to get a full automatic shot that is going to tear through every single enemy, especially the bosses. But finding all of those power-ups in each individual stage is going to be a challenge in and of itself. And I love just how this game's story progresses and how the stages unfold. There's not a ton of story here, but you never need that in an arcade game. But just off the top from the second stage here, we're flying through the air, taking out all these gigantic winged beasts, shooting them into the earth. It is just such a fast-paced game, and I love how many sprites it can put on screen at once and how many visual effects it can pull off, all while maintaining that locked 60 frame per second clip. And the best part is all 60 of those frames are going to have some amazing artwork in it. These statues here, the stone-faced golem, as well as what looks like a fox shooting at you and rotating in real time, is just such an amazing aesthetic, and I think that's why I really love this game. The art style and the overall universe that Dragon Gun inhabits just is something that I love in an arcade game. Definitely completely different than something like The House of the Dead or Beast Busters, even different than Alien 3: The Gun. Same gameplay style, but I just really like all of the sprites, all of the scaling, and the universe the game takes place in. And again, this is a 2-player experience, so bring a friend, grab a couple different controllers or light guns, and you'll be off to the races on this one. And do be aware the cabinet did use an analog gun shaped like a dragon, so you're going to be able to use just a standard controller if you want. This isn't technically a light gun game, it's a light gun genre game where the controls work on XY coordinates just like any other analog stick would. I'm going to give you a sample of the soundtrack best I can, because there's going to be a lot of gunfire sound effects over it, because of course you're shooting the entire time, but I would say Data East had some of the best music of any arcade maker, up there with Sega and Konami, and this game has an absolutely outstanding soundtrack. So go ahead and listen for 45 seconds, ignore the gunshots, and I'll be right back. I tried to pick out a section there where you could get a decent amount of the soundtrack, but of course, like any arcade like-gun game, those bullet sound effects are going to be overriding the music almost the entire way. The balance is good here, but it's just one of those things you got to get used to hearing the sounds. That's why sometimes in these videos, I actually just underlay the soundtrack and remove the game audio so you don't hear that little bit of clicking the entirety of the video and those gunshots. But as we move into the third stage here, you'll see we just shut down that little foxy character, and that's going to have different power-ups, more bombs, a higher power for your weapon, health, shields, things such as that. So you want to be looking for them in basically every single square inch of the environment, because if you can power that gun up 100%, it is going to be hugely to your benefit. But I just love, again, how this game works. In some instances, it kind of feels a little bit like Space Harrier, and in other instances, it kind of feels like the House of the Dead, and that's a great combination to have. And I just love horror light-gun games, and I love the monsters in these titles. They're so unique, they're so varied, they're so kind of comic book horror. It really does feel like a Dungeons & Dragons game that just happens to be a light-gun shooter, and honestly, I'm surprised there's never been a D&D light-gun game. If anyone's listening out there and wants to make one, maybe particularly for VR, I would buy it every day of the week and twice on Sunday. But as we kind of just mow through these zombies here, again, Data East made some incredible arcade games. Sure, they had some duds, but every maker did. But something like Dragon Gun is one of those games that I never hear anyone mention, and it really does bum me out. The best part is this thing emulates almost perfectly in MAME. You're just going to be missing a little bit of visual in some of the boss fights, but if I didn't tell you that, you'd probably never know it was there. And it is an incredibly hard PCB to find. I've been looking for over a year. I wanted to do a real hardware capture for this for Halloween this year, and I could not find a single example for sale. So it's definitely one of those titles. Emulation is going to be the way you want to play it. But I absolutely love the boss fights in this game. This gigantic frog here, Flogog, I believe is how it's pronounced. That's how it's said on the screen at least. It's just so much fun. A gigantic amphibious creature with what looks to be a tuft of like gray hair or spines on his head. It's going to be popping up and down on these waves. And again, I love all the sprite work in this game. You have those two layers that basically look like an infinite scaling plane, and you have all of these well animated waves really selling the illusion of fluid water. This is about as good as it could get in 1992 as far as this look was concerned, and I would say that Data East, their hardware and their developers and artists, could do everything that Sega could in the overall 2D sphere. Will you leave me a comment down below and you tell me what you think of the graphics of this game? I think for the most part, people will be very impressed for 1992, because again, think of what we were playing at home. It couldn't hold a candle to something like Dragon Gun. And do tell me if you've ever seen an arcade cabinet for this game. This is one of those rare games that I've never actually played on an arcade cabinet. I only know it via emulation, and that is bumming me out, because I definitely want to either find a cabinet for it or at least the PCB for my collection. As we move into the next level here, I'm going to give you one more soundtrack sample. Again, it's going to be gunshot sound effect heavy, but this game just has such a vibe on the soundtrack. Definitely something you should look up outside of this video and just listen to some of the tracks. They are that good. But 30 more seconds and I'll be back with just a little bit more of Dragon Gun. Just such a good soundtrack, such good sound effects, and I even love the voice actor in there just screaming Dragon Gun when you pop off one of those Dragon Gun related bombs. And they are called bombs, but honestly it's just this gigantic translucent dragon that's going to fly into the screen and decimate every single enemy. As we get into this lava pit here, definitely just looks like a sea of blood in all of the best ways possible. But if you're looking for a deep cut arcade game in the horror genre to play this October, you can do a lot worse than Dragon Gun. There was a ton of games that I could have featured in the past. If you've never played something like Maison Flash the Blade on Sega Naomi, can't recommend that one enough. It's an absolutely awesome arcade light gun game. If you never played Alien 3 The Gun, I talked about that 2 Halloweens ago. Definitely load that one up on MAME. It's just as good as anything else. And I even love this little skull wall here. Definitely some H.R. Geiger inspired artwork going on in this game. And obviously he is one of the masters of horror design, so if you can compare any game to his art, you're definitely going to have a fun time as well. but Dragon Gun is just one of those games. I absolutely love it because A, it's a light gun shooter, B, it's a horror themed game, and C, it's an absolute deep cut that I feel like most people have never heard of before. But again, if you ever heard of this, leave me your thoughts down below. I'm assuming most people enjoy this game if they play it, and I think most of you who've never played it before are going to come away with maybe a new favorite hidden gem light gun game, because just go through Data East's entire catalog. Just like every other maker, you're definitely going to hit a dud here and there, but for the most part I would say when Data East absolutely hit, they hit as good as any other arcade developer out there, and Dragon Gun is no different than that. It has everything I want. It's a concise, tight 30 minutes of fun, and the game's over and you can move on with your day. And because it's October, it absolutely fills out that spooky quota that you need to have in your life. The only other thing that could make me any happier other than playing Dragon Gun is maybe one day somebody decides to make a Hellraiser survival horror game. That's just something I'd absolutely love to check out, but I know the odds of that are basically 0%, but we can always assume and kind of guess at what might happen next, and sometimes we're right. So if I can manifest a Hellraiser game into existence, I'll definitely leave that at the last Halloween video for October. Hope you guys enjoyed. We'll see you next week with more arcade games. If we're done, happy Halloween. Bye-bye.